Have you ever wondered why, even when everything seems to be going well, a feeling of emptiness persists? You achieve something you really wanted, feel a rush of pleasure, but soon find yourself bored, dissatisfied, looking for the next thing. It's as if we're stuck in an endless cycle where nothing is ever enough for very long. This feeling isn't unique to you. It's more common than you might think, and was described in a striking way by one of the most provocative philosophers of the 19th century, Arthur Schopenhauer. For him, human life oscillates like a pendulum, swinging between two inevitable extremes, pleasure and boredom. When we are on the pleasure side, we feel momentary relief, but it doesn't last. Soon, boredom sets in, and when we are bored, we desperately search for something to excite us, to take us out of that state. We live in a constant state of coming and going, without rest, without peace. The goal of this video is to show you that this oscillation is not a personal defect or a character flaw. In fact, it is a structural part of the human condition, and understanding this can bring you relief, clarity, and more autonomy over your emotions. Let's explore together what this pendulum means, why it exists, and most importantly, how we can better deal with it in a reality that seems to demand constant pleasure and rejects any sign of silence or boredom. And before we continue, check if you are already subscribed to the channel. This helps us to continue producing in-depth content like this, always with accessible and transformative language. To understand the pendulum, we first need to know who Schopenhauer was and why his ideas remain so alive today. Who was Schopenhauer and why his views still matter? Arthur Schopenhauer was a 19th century German thinker known for his profound, direct, and often disturbing philosophy. Unlike other philosophers of his time, he had no interest in painting an optimistic picture of existence. On the contrary, he saw life as something marked by suffering, desire, and constant frustration. For him, human beings are driven by an irrational force that he called will, a kind of blind impulse that keeps us always wanting something, always unsatisfied. This view may seem bleak at first glance, but there is something liberating about it. Schopenhauer does not sugarcoat human anguish. He looks us in the face and offers us the chance to understand why we feel the way we do and what we can do about it. His best-known work, The World as Will and Representation, proposes that everything we perceive in the world is merely a representation shaped by our desires. The reality behind this is this incessant desire, which is never satisfied. This explains why moments of pleasure are so fleeting and why even after fulfilling our desires, we soon feel a new emptiness. Despite being ignored by many of his contemporaries, Schopenhauer profoundly influenced thinkers such as Nietzsche, Freud, Tolstoy, Kafka, and even artists and musicians. His ideas helped pave the way for existentialism and psychoanalysis. Today, in a world of hyperconnectivity, accelerated consumption, and instant rewards, Schopenhauer's philosophy sounds more relevant than ever. The relentless search for stimulation, the constant feeling of emptiness, the silent anguish in the midst of excess. He had already described all of this, long before we had social media or digital anxiety. Understanding who Schopenhauer was is not just about knowing a name from the history of philosophy. It is about looking in the mirror more honestly and seeing clearly the root of many of our daily concerns. And it is precisely from this basis that we can delve into the most powerful metaphor of his philosophy, the pendulum between pleasure and boredom, which dominates our experience of living. The pendulum, the metaphor of human life. For Schopenhauer, human life is like a pendulum in constant motion. On one side, there is pleasure, that which we desire, seek, and yearn for. On the other, there is boredom, the emptiness we feel when there is nothing left to want, when desire is satisfied, and all that remains is time, silence, and the lack of novelty. This image of the pendulum is not just symbolic. It describes with almost surgical precision the way we live. We want something, a new experience, a new object, an achievement. As long as we are desiring, we are in motion. As soon as we get what we want, we feel a small dose of pleasure. But then emptiness comes. And then to escape this emptiness, we seek the next desire. The pendulum swings, always. Think about everyday situations. You buy something new, a cell phone, a piece of clothing, a game. and you feel excited. But a few days later, it no longer has the same spark. You enter a relationship and experience a phase of intense passion. Over time, emotions stabilize and boredom can set in. You plan a trip, count down the days, and get excited. But when you return, everything seems more boring than before. This cycle accompanies us from the smallest moments to the biggest life choices. Schopenhauer believed that this constant oscillation was inevitable because it arises from the very structure of the human will. We want, we achieve, we get frustrated or bored, and we start again. The problem is that, without realizing it, we become hostages to this movement. We spend our lives trying to prolong pleasure and avoid boredom, but the pendulum always swings back, always. The pendulum metaphor is so powerful because it reveals that behind much of our modern suffering, there is not a personal flaw, but an existential pattern. And understanding this pattern is the first step toward breaking the automaticity of this oscillation. If this content is making sense to you so far, please like the video. This helps us a lot to continue producing reflections like this with depth and clarity. Now that we understand how the pendulum works, let's explore the root of this dissatisfaction. Why are we never at peace even when we have everything we wanted? The cycle of dissatisfaction. Why are we never at peace? Once we understand the constant movement between pleasure and boredom, the inevitable question arises: why does this happen? Why can we never simply be satisfied, no matter how much we achieve what we desire? For Schopenhauer, the answer lies in what he called will. This will is neither rational nor planned. It is a blind, incessant, impulsive force that moves us from within. It does not ask whether we are happy. It simply desires, without end. We are constantly wanting something, a specific food, a compliment, a novelty, a distraction. And even when we get it, the will does not disappear. It simply changes focus. Immediately, a new desire arises, and with it, a new restlessness. This is why pleasure is always short-lived, while dissatisfaction is almost constant. Pleasure arises when a desire is momentarily satisfied. It is the relief of tension, but as soon as this relief passes, the desire returns, and with it, the anguish of wanting it again. What we call happiness is just a fleeting interval between two forms of restlessness, desire and boredom. This explanation may seem harsh, but it describes with disconcerting precision what many people experience and cannot name. How many times have you accomplished something important and, shortly after, felt lost? How many times has what seemed like a sinecure become routine and the routine has become a nuisance? This is where the pendulum becomes a subtle prison. When we are on the side of desire, we suffer from lack. When we are on the side of achievement, we suffer from emptiness. On neither side do we find lasting peace. And the most surprising thing is how this pattern begins early and repeats itself throughout life. From childhood, we are conditioned to seek something outside of ourselves: toys, rewards, attention. We grow up and exchange toys for more complex goals, but the internal process remains the same. We are always projecting satisfaction into the future, and when it arrives, it no longer serves us. Constant dissatisfaction, then, is not a bug in the system. It is the system. It is the way the will operates. And the more we seek to escape it with more pleasure, the deeper we become entangled in this cycle. To get out of this, we need to do more than wish for better. We need to understand the structure of this movement and rethink how we respond to it. But before that, it's worth noting how today's society not only accepts this cycle, but intensifies it. That's what we'll talk about next. The stimulus society, how we fell into the pleasure trap. If the pendulum between pleasure and boredom is already part of our nature, today's culture seems to have found a way to accelerate this movement even further. We live in an age of hyperstimulation. Everything around us screams for attention, notifications, short videos, promotions, music, news. We are bombarded with stimuli all the time and encouraged to always seek more. This stimulus society not only recognizes the pendulum, it profitably exploits it. The logic is simple. The more dissatisfied we are, the more we will consume. Products, experiences, ideas, relationships. Boredom is treated as a flaw to be corrected immediately, and pleasure as a non-negotiable right to be sought at any cost. Social media is a clear example. Here, the reward is instant. Likes, messages, notifications. Each swipe of the finger offers a new chance for momentary pleasure. But as Schopenhauer already intuited long before the internet, this pleasure is volatile. In a few seconds, the dopamine drops, the emptiness returns, and the finger swipes again, in an unconscious attempt to escape boredom. This logic extends to all areas of life: the way we eat, consume entertainment, deal with relationships, and even with spirituality. We are always looking for the next peak of pleasure, the next achievement, the next distraction. And when silence arrives, when routine imposes itself, restlessness arises, the fear of boredom. The problem is that this constant escape from boredom distances us from ourselves. We lose the ability to be silent, to observe ourselves, to simply be. Boredom, which could be a fertile space for self-knowledge, begins to be seen as an enemy, to be urgently defeated. And the faster the world moves, the harder it becomes to find inner peace. The pendulum swings faster, and with it comes anxiety, exhaustion, frustration. We become dependent on stimulation, and at the same time, insensitive to simplicity. Understanding this is not an invitation to reject technology or pleasure altogether. Rather, it is a call to consciousness. How are we relating to the stimuli around us? Are we using them, or are they using us? By the way, I really want to hear from you. When do you most feel this urge to seek immediate pleasure? When boredom sets in, what do you usually do? Leave a comment below. I'll read everything carefully. In the next chapter, we'll take a break and look at the other side of the pendulum. Boredom. Is it really the villain of the story? Boredom is not the enemy. A new look at emptiness. After so long running away from boredom, it may seem strange to think of it as something that doesn't need to be fought, but perhaps that's where the turning point lies. What if boredom, instead of an enemy to be defeated, is a messenger, an invitation to silence, to presence, to reconnect with oneself? Schopenhauer recognized boredom as an inevitable part of human life. He saw boredom as that which arises when the will is momentarily at rest. It is the space between one desire and another, and although it is uncomfortable, it has a value that most of us have learned to ignore. Boredom doesn't have to be filled with distractions. It can be observed. It can become fertile ground for reflection, creativity, rest and renewal. Great ideas come when we're not doing anything. Some of the most important moments of inner clarity happen when there are no competing stimuli for attention. But it's hard to face boredom without resistance, especially in a world that conditions us to be busy all the time. The feeling of having nothing going on can be anxiety-inducing, as if we're wasting time or falling behind. The truth is that boredom forces us to find meaning beyond consumption, and that's something we're not always taught to do. Recovering the ability to be consciously bored means recovering part of our autonomy. It means allowing the pace of life to slow down. It means paying attention to the details again, to our breathing, to our surroundings, to our thoughts. And from this silence, something new can emerge, not as an explosion of pleasure, but as a calmer, more centered presence. In this sense, boredom can be therapeutic. It detoxifies. It removes the layers of stimuli that numb us and gradually returns us to the pure experience of being alive. It is uncomfortable at first, but over time it can become a powerful ally in the process of self-knowledge. The key is to change our relationship with the void. Instead of filling it, we can inhabit it. Instead of running away, we can learn to stay. And it is with this new perspective that we arrive at the next step: how to live with more balance, without being dragged by the extremes of pleasure and boredom. The middle ground, living consciously between extremes. If we cannot eliminate the pendulum, the question that arises is how to live with it, how to find a way of existing that does not depend exclusively on the search for pleasure, nor fear the emergence of boredom. The answer may lie in awareness. Being aware means observing the movement of life without being completely overwhelmed by it. It means noticing when we are craving something just to escape the emptiness and choosing to stay instead. It means recognizing pleasure when it comes, without clinging desperately to its continuation, and accepting boredom when it arrives, without treating it as a defect. This middle ground is not a neutral state, devoid of emotion. On the contrary, it is a space where life gains depth. It is there that we can savor the simple, a quiet conversation, a guilt-free break, a task done with attention. It is not the absence of pain or desire, but full presence before what is. Living this way requires an internal realignment. Instead of measuring life by peaks of intensity, we begin to appreciate it for what is constant. We begin to value routine not as something boring, but as a haven of stability. The small rituals, the moments of silence, the contact with the present, take on new meaning. This path is not found all at once. It is something that is built little by little with patience. And even when we slip back into the old pendulum cycle, and we will inevitably slip, we no longer do so in the same way. Consciousness changes everything. It does not impede movement, but it changes our attitude toward it. Finding that middle ground is perhaps the most authentic form of freedom. Not the freedom to do everything all the time, but the freedom to no longer be held hostage by the constant need for stimulation. If this reflection brought you some clarity or sparked a new perspective, please like the video. This shows that this type of content makes sense to you and helps us continue producing with dedication. The pendulum dance, acceptance and inner freedom. Throughout this journey, we have seen that the pendulum described by Schopenhauer is not just a distant metaphor, it is present in the daily rhythm of our existence. We oscillate between the pleasure we desire and the boredom we avoid, often without realizing it. And in this constant oscillation, we seek meaning, a pause, an answer. But perhaps the answer is not in stopping the pendulum, nor in trying to force it to swing in one direction. Perhaps the answer is in dancing with it, accepting that life is movement, that pleasure passes, and that's okay, that boredom arrives, and that's okay too. Freedom is not in eliminating extremes, but in not being enslaved by them. True peace can arise when we stop demanding that life be an endless festival of stimuli and begin to see value in what is simple, repetitive, and silent. When we learn to observe our desires without letting them drag us down. When we recognize that dissatisfaction is not a personal flaw, but part of the human condition, and that despite it, we can live with more lightness, presence, and autonomy. Schopenhauer may have had a pessimistic view of existence, but he also offered us a path, the path of awareness, contemplation, and lucid acceptance. He invites us to look within, to understand our movements, and from there, build a more stable, less reactive, more personal life. If something in this video touched you, provoked you, or helped you, see life in a different way, subscribe to the channel right now. This is the purpose here, to bring deep but accessible reflections that will help you live with more clarity and truth. Thanks for sticking around. And remember, the pendulum keeps swinging, but you can choose how to move with it.